Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Lamentations, the 4th chapter, continuing, from where we left off in the 3rd chapter, as the author here is describing the distress, the anguish, but also the point of repentance, right, and mercy, right, that and hope that we still have in the Lord, even though we're going through this situation, because we understand that it is only through the Lord that we can be delivered from whatever case we're in, right? In this case, it was the distress of the siege, right? So this is Lamentations chapter 4, verse 1. How is the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. So usually when you have gold and you purify it, it becomes shiny, right, and bright. And here, as we're going to read on down, this gold is likened onto that glow from the gold was likened onto the precious state that Israel was once in, or once known as. And now, due to this situation, this event here, it is now the opposite, right? So as it says here, the stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. Now, stones, you don't pour stones, right? This is just a way of saying, like, as we were besieged, right? When they finally broke through the siege, they destroyed the walls, they broke down the temple. So you pretty much had the temple being broken down, and the blocks, the materials that it was made of, just scattered all around, like destruction. Verse 2, the precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold. How are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter? So imagine just like a pot, right? Like a clay pot. The value between gold and a clay pot is drastically different, right? It's a great difference between the two. And so as he's saying here, he's likening the fall of Israel here in this case to where at one point we were likened onto fine gold, right? That's how valuable and precious we were. And now we're our people at this point in time were looked at pretty much, like you would look at a clay pot and compared to gold. So it pretty much brought down, to a very low state. The work of the hands of the potter. Even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones, right? So, like when today, even for example, right, drawing out the breast, when you have a mother gave birth to a child, how does she feed the child? At least how is she supposed to? She whips out her breast, and then the child sucks on it and gets the milk, and it gives them the proper nutrients that they need to grow, to continue to develop their brain, their bones, everything, right? So here he's saying even the sea monsters, right? Even the creatures, the animals, give suck to their young ones, right? They feed their children. However, the daughter of my people has become cruel. And here he's mainly talking about the women, okay, of Israel. And he's saying they've become cruel like the ostriches in the wilderness, in particular because of this difficult, hard situation that they were put in, to where it was so, times are so bad that it changed, the delicate women to become cruel. And as we keep on reading down, we'll see why he says that. But then he compares the women right here to ostriches, right? Why say that they're cruel like the ostriches in the wilderness? So let's go real quick to the book of Job, chapter 39, let's start up at verse 12. It says here, wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn? Now, when you actually go up a bit, it's talking about the unicorn, right? Which we know, the physical animal, right, is likened onto, a variation of a ram, right, that just has the long horn in the center instead of like the two horns that bend. Okay, but it also represents the twofold meaning, right? It also represents the internet now. But anyway, verse 13. Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which leaveth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them? She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear. So this is why he likened the daughters of Israel or of Zion to like being cruel to like an ostrich, because here you're seeing the nature or the characteristics of an ostrich here, burying the eggs and pretty much like leaving it, as though whatever happens, right? As it says, she's hardened against her young ones as though they were not hers. As where normally is the opposite, right? Verse 17, because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. So in context, right, when you even come back down here to the 17th verse, because we bring this out, to compare it to women. But in context, this is actually speaking of the ostriches, okay, or of an ostrich. However, similar to how Jeremiah in here, who I believe is the author of the book of Lamentations, similar to how he compares the women of our nation here to these ostriches here, right? When we use this precept, it's always, that's why like the apostles mentioned, you always got to qualify it, right? And what is the actual contextual meaning of it? But now what is the use case, right? What is the in this case, how are you using it? But it's always important to give the contextual meaning so you know exactly what it's talking about. But yet you can still compare, right, this to our women today, similar to how it's being done here. So this is why he's likening the daughters right here becoming cruel to like the ostriches in the wilderness. And in this case, the reason they became like that is because of how hard times, let's put it like that. It made them, that desperation made them start to do things that they wouldn't normally do. Verse 4, the tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. Yeah, because when you're very thirsty and your mouth becomes dry, your saliva becomes sticky. All right, to where now, if you have ever gotten to that point of thirst, it's hard to even speak. And your tongue does cleave to your, the roof of your mouth. So in this case, because of the famine, no food, no water, no breast milk, nothing. Even the sucking children were starving. It says, the young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them, because there was nothing. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. So those that at one point, which these would be considered like those that are doing well, royalty, high, the princes, those that ate the delicate foods, now, as it says, they're desolate in the streets. So everybody started to suffer, because when there's a siege, you're limited on your supplies. Remember, there's a reason why trade exists between different countries. There's a reason why you have merchants. There's a reason why people move, because like today you have people ship goods and import goods and export goods. So one country alone, or one place alone, is not enough, right? Unless you just so happen to have everything, but you're usually going to need something, and that's why you trade and interact with these other nations. In this case, when there's a siege, they cut off your supplies. Nothing is coming in, nothing is going out. It's like today, it's like being put on lockdown, right? Imagine when they implemented the lockdowns, they said nobody was allowed to go out at all. Not even for essential goods, not even for groceries, and you couldn't order any delivery services or anything like that. What's going to happen? Eventually, you're going to run out of food. You're going to run out of whatever's in your house, and you can't leave your house, and nobody can come in. So what's going to happen? You're going to start to starve. Things are going to get hard. So that's what was happening here, right? As it says, those that feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. Now the scarlet is mentioned because it was I guess you could say a symbol or representation of wealth, because scarlet, meaning like the scarlet clothing or garments or whatnot, that scarlet, the dye that was used to make those garments was very, very, very expensive. Okay, so only those that could actually afford it would be those that would wear it. So as it's highlighting here again, right? Those that were brought up in scarlet now embrace dunghills, because it's gotten so bad that even those that were rich, that were well, that were doing good, are now, pretty much at the bottom, right? And dunghills were usually areas where you would like put garbage or burn it or stuff like that. Verse 6, for the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom. So the judgment the Lord brought upon us as a result of the wickedness that our people were doing is worse than what he did to Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what's being said here. That was overthrown as in a moment, and no hands stayed on her. So with Sodom and Gomorrah, it was destroyed, but it was like that. With this one, it was like a long, drawn-out siege that really, really, inflicted misery and agony upon people, like a slow death. Verse 7, her Nazarites were purer than snow. This is talking about Israel, right? And these verses here are not literal, okay? It's poetic, it's metaphorical. But as it says, her Nazarites were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. And when you go into that word ruddy, they'll try to make it as like red, because when you look at a ruby, it is like red. But obviously, people are not actually red, right? This is like a hue of brown. Okay, like you have people that do have a reddish brown complexion here. But like I mentioned, it's not actually literal, right? They're not redder than rubies, and they're not actually whiter than milk. Okay. But this was just metaphorical here. Now in this verse, in the 7th verse here, when it says that, it is highlighting the how well off our people were prior to this situation. That's why he's saying that they're purer than snow, they're whiter than milk, they're more ruddy than rubies, they're polished. The comparison here, these are good. Verse 8, however, their visage is blacker than a coal. And when you go into that word visage, it goes into appearance. So now they went from being white, being pure, to now being blacker than coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. When your skin cleaves to your bones, it means you're looking like this. Let's look up see, children in famine. And let's see if we can get, yep, there you go. So I didn't even need to do much, but this is an example of skin cleaving to your bones, because you have your bones, of course, you have, your tendons, your muscle fibers and all of that, tissues, and they're all in between, right? You have the lowest layer, then the layers above, then the layers above, and then your skin on the outer layer. When you don't get food to eat and your body needs to get energy, it goes through your fat reserves, eventually to your muscles, your tissues, and as it's doing all of this, you're getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. So this is an example of their skin cleaving to their bones. It's like literally stuck onto their bones because they don't have anything to eat. So as it says here, their skin cleaveth to their bones. It is withered. It is become like a stick. So as you could see somebody's arm, right? For example, if you look at this lady, you can see her arm, right? But when you look at this kid, you can see his arm. So it is withered, right? It is, what did we just read? It has become like a stick, small, skinny, fragile. Verse 9, they that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger. For these pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the fields. Meaning, if you were to die with a sword, with a weapon, you either get your head cut off, get stabbed in a vital organ, something along those lines. It's better than to die of hunger, not having food to eat, because if you die by the sword, it's quicker, right? So you don't really suffer for long. But if you're starving to death, then, as he says, they pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the field. So it's a slow, painful process of being hungry and hungrier and hungrier and weaker, and all these other symptoms come along with it because you're so hungry and you have nothing to eat or drink. So it's an agonizing way to be taken out. The hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children, meaning they when you sodden, you pretty much like boil it, right? So what do they do here? They killed their children and ate them. That's cannibalism. Okay. And it says pitiful because this is the sad case that they were put in, to where they were so desperate, so hungry, that they resorted to cooking and eating their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Okay, and here in this case, it's talking about the nation, really the southern kingdom at this point, predominantly, right? Because he still had some of the northern kingdom, a few sprinkled in there. But as you can see, it says they were their meat, meaning their food, in the destruction of the daughter of my people. So during the siege, as there was no food to eat, eventually it got so bad that women started, killing and cooking their children and eating them. And there's a pretty vivid account of that in the book of Josephus that happened during the siege of Jerusalem. Verse 11, and you really have to be in a very, very desperate and crazed state to do that, because the Lord made it so human flesh does not smell appetizing at all, whether cooked or boiled or fried or whatever. It does not smell appetizing because it's not meant to be eaten. When you fry chicken or lamb or beef, the scent is good and it makes you hungry. You start salivating, and all of that. That's not the case with human flesh. So in order for you to still be able to go through with that and eat it at the end, imagine what state they had to be in. That's why it mentions them being pitiful. Verse 11, the Lord Yahweh hath accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. So this all happened because the Lord was angry. And here it says he has accomplished his fury, meaning that the wrath the Lord had by witnessing the wickedness that was going on in the land, he has now accomplished or fulfilled that or appeased that in this moment via this judgment that he brought upon our people. He hath poured out his fierce anger and kindled a fire in Zion, both metaphorically and literally, right? That fire representing like his rage, but also literally by the hands of our enemies. They actually lit fires and burnt down, buildings and cities and even people, right? And it hath devoured the foundations thereof. The whole point as to why we needed to rebuild the temple and the walls was because of this. Verse 12, the kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem, because we were known as, having a God that would protect us, right? A God, the same God that destroyed or damaged Egypt, the same God that was with us when we took down Jericho and the land of Canaan. So it was known, so much so that when you read in the book of Judith, I believe maybe the 4th chapter, Achior, which I think he was an Ammonite, was explaining how, like, the situation of our people and our history, and how you don't want to go and mess with us while we're good with our God, okay? Because you're going to get messed up. It's only when our God we're separated and he's upset at us that we are basically vulnerable for the taking. So here, it's like a shock to say, what? These people? How? What happened? How is it possible that you would have a nation actually be able to go up in there and take them down like that? Because of the history or the reputation of the things we did via our God. Verse 13, for the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests that have shed the blood of the just in the midst of her. Now, it's not necessarily that the priests and the prophets were like actually going around physically just stabbing people up, but they caused people to be put to death. Okay, whether it's in misleading them or it's in how do you say unrighteous decrees for anybody that didn't want to adhere to whatever it is they were teaching, because of these false prophets and these priests. They got so corrupted that they were just taking advantage of the people, right? And just working for their own gain. So you can imagine what would happen to anybody that would speak against them. Even Jeremiah, for example, who was cast into they put him in the stocks, and that's not a light thing. You can look up stocks and see what it'd be like. When you sit down for like 2 hours straight, you got to stand up and stretch. Well, when you're in the stocks, you don't get that ability to do so. You're stuck in the same position for hours. Verse 14, they have wandered as blind men in the streets. They have polluted themselves with blood. So like a blind man is one that doesn't, he can't see, right? He can't see the right way to go. He can't see and that's how these people were moving, not literally, but spiritually, by their actions, because they didn't take heed to the righteous ways of the Lord, which is our direction and our light. As it says, they have polluted themselves with blood so that men could not touch their garments. Once again, metaphorical, but it's to highlight the how filthy our people became with all this iniquity and sins and bloodshed upon their hands. So much so that it's likened onto somebody being bloodied up, so much so that you can't even touch their garments. It says, they cried unto them, depart ye, it is unclean, depart, touch not. When they fled away and wandered, they said among the heathen, they shall no more sojourn here. So pretty much nobody wanted them around. Like, no, get out of here, you're unclean, leave. And then wherever they went, as it says, they fled away and wandered. They said among the heathen, they shall no more sojourn here. So don't come here. You gotta go. Once again, this was just a representation of like they were so unclean, so filthy, so filled with iniquity, that it's likened onto somebody that is so unclean that you just got to get them out of your presence, and nobody wants them around. Verse 16, because you have to imagine, right, when you're reading these scriptures, the same way kind of like how we prophesy. When we prophesy and we're out there, or even when we're doing these lessons, not everything we say is literal, right? We give examples, we give scenarios. Sometimes you'll read a precept, you'll break it down, and then in the midst you'll give an example and say something along the lines of, X such and such and such. It's like if someone today went to the White House and said blah 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 before Biden. Imagine how fast the Secret Service would jump on him and throw his ass out. That didn't actually happen, right? But that is just a scenario or an example that you're given to prove, or make whatever you're saying clearer. So it's similar when you're reading these scriptures here. Verse 16, the anger of the Lord Yahweh hath divided them, right? Going into like as high, like how you would divide prey or spoils. And he hath divided us among our adversaries. He will no more regard them. They respected not the persons of the priest. They favored not the elders. And these were the ones that the actual ones that would keep the ordinances of the Lord. They weren't respected. They weren't revered. They weren't, favored. Instead, everybody did what was right in their own eyes, which led to the mass idolatry, adultery, murder, and X amount of iniquity that was being committed. As for us, our eyes as yet failed for our vain help. In our watching, we have watched for a nation that could not save us. So pretty much there was no hope, right? No nation, not Egypt, no nation came and was able to come to our aid during this time. Verse 18, they hunt our steps, dealing with the Babylonians here in this case, or just call them, it was that our adversaries, right? They hunt our steps. We cannot go in our streets. Our end is near. Our days are fulfilled, for our end is come. And that's what happened, right? When in a siege, you have the enemies that are right out there. And depending on how many layers of defense or walls you have, if they break through the first, now they're in the inner. Then they either scale the walls, or they break through with like their battering rams and so on, and they keep on making their way inner and inner and inner. And so the inhabitants need to start going inner and inner and inner, right? Because the enemies are now closing in on them, as they would say. It says here, our persecutors are swifter than the eagles of heaven or of the heaven. They have pursued us upon the mountains. They laid wait for us in the wilderness. So there was no escape. And Zedekiah tried it, and he got caught, right? So whether you try to flee through the back, through the front, you try to go this way, they had troops everywhere. Verse 20, the breath of our nostrils, the anointed of the Lord, was taken in their pits, of whom we said, under his shadow we shall live among the heathen. And this is referring to the king, right? Here it says, so the anointed of the Lord is the king. And as it says, the breath of our nostrils, he's pretty much being likened onto like the life, right, of the nation here. So as it says, even him, the king, the one the Lord anointed, was taken in their pits, meaning in their trap, in their snare, fell prey to them, of whom we said, under his shadow, right, under his protection, under his reign, we will live among the heathen, meaning under his reign we'll be good, or protected from even the heathens round about. But as it says, even he was taken. And to make it clearer, if you read this in some other translations, I think the NLT does it pretty well, NIV as well. It says, our king, the Lord's anointed, the very life of our nation, was caught in their snares. We had thought that his shadow would protect us against any nation on earth, but it didn't, because they were going off, king included. Verse 21, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. Now, when you look up the land of Uz, it's like south of Judah, I think more southeast. See, land of Uz, Bible map. Okay, this isn't too bad. So there you go. So you can see they put it somewhere around here. You got Edom over here, and then you have, this is the Gaza Strip, right? And then you have, I think this is the Jordan, or somewhere around here. If you zoom in a bit, you have the Sea of Galilee up north, then the Jordan River that's flowing through, and then the Dead Sea, and so on. So Edom, right, which was down around this region, as you can see, they also place us roughly around here. So it's not entirely like 100%, but they place them around this region here, based on what we know in the scriptures. But as it says here, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, thou that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. So go ahead and rejoice now, because that judgment is also going to come to you. And the cup represents judgment, as it says, shall pass through unto thee. Now, ultimately, this judgment that's going to come upon Esau, Edom, is going to come ultimately in this time. And we know that because when we read the 22nd verse, it will clarify that a bit for us. Though the Edomites at the time when this was actually taking place, helped the Babylonians against us, right? That record is in 1 Ezra, the 4th chapter. The book of Obadiah also talks about it, right? Though they did all those things, that ultimate judgment that the Lord is going to bring, that cup that they're going to have to drink, is going to be in this time. As it says, thou shalt be drunken and shall make thyself naked, meaning you're gonna drink of this judgment. You're gonna have to undergo the judgment the Lord has for you. And similar to when you get drunk, as it says, you make yourself naked, to where now people see your shame, right? But they're going to have to bear that shame that's going to come with that judgment that the Lord is going to bring upon them. Okay. Verse 22, the punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. Now, interestingly enough, at the time when this took place, that wasn't the case, right? Our iniquity, what ended up happening was we had the siege, but then we were taken captive into Babylon for X amount of years. And then it wasn't until the Persians came into power that, we were allowed to come back and rebuild. But then we went back into captivity under the Greeks, and then under the Romans, and so on. So the punishment of our iniquity was not accomplished at this time, but rather it will be in this time that we're living in, when Yahushua comes back. Because as it says, continuing, he will no more carry thee away into captivity. But I just mentioned about like 3 or so captivities, or 2 captivities that we went through after this. So when is it that we're no longer going to be carried away into captivity? When the Lord sends his son back to deliver us. That is when our punishment is going to be actually accomplished. And the daughter of Zion is representing the nation of Israel. But this is going to start with the elect of the nation of Israel. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom, which represents the Edomites. He will discover thy sins. See, so when our punishment is up and we're not going to go into captivity anymore, yours is going to be getting visited. And your sins are going to be getting brought out and discovered and exposed. And then that judgment is going to come upon them. And so that brings us to the end of Lamentations, the 4th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rachah Kodesh. Until next time, Shalom.